Hey Ken, this is Greg. It's February 9th, year 2022, and here for your for lesson number 20 from To Kill a Mockingbird. We didn't cover a whole lot in class today. We did cover one chapter, whatever chapter that is, 22, and it's a short chapter, but we kind of dissected it as usual. They're not going to be finished by next Monday, which is when they wanted to be finished because they wanted to start the movie then. But it ended up being a good class discussion. We had extraneous discussions not directly related to the book, and I'm not going to go over those today. But a lot of it had to do with our legal system and juries and judges and stuff like that. And the kids had pretty good questions. They were just curious about some things, why things are the way they are, why we had juries. Couldn't a judge just overrule the jury if he thought their verdict was wrong? Yeah, a bunch of this. We talked about sequestering a jury, what a hung jury is. So, and these were all student-generated questions. They weren't things that I came up with them. But they had some good questions. We covered the outcome of the verdict yesterday, and of course they all knew what the verdict was going to be, and yet it still bothered them as it should. That couldn't something override the verdict. So anyway, I want to start today with something I left out yesterday, and this is the end of chapter 21. I don't know why I didn't include this yesterday. It's about when Atticus leaves the courtroom and everybody has left. It's such a good scene in the movie, and it's the same here as well. My kids have really been getting into the story big time now, and they're caught up on every chapter. They have a lot of questions, and they're very quiet, exceptionally quiet, during the reading, and you can tell they're really into what we're doing. But this last thing, Atticus was walking out of the courtroom, then he walked down the center aisle. Of course, all the black people up in the colored balcony, as they call it, they all stood up, and the Reverend Sykes said, "Miss Jean Louise," because Scout was sitting down as her dad was leaving. I looked around. They were all standing. All around us and in the balcony on the opposite wall, the Negroes were getting to their feet. Reverend Sykes' voice was as distant as Judge Taylor's. That's such a marvelous line coming up here. "Miss Jean Louise, stand up. Your father's passing." What an ultimate show of respect that the black people had for Atticus Finch. And, again, I don't mean to rehash things. It's just the way I talk in class. And eventually, you hear things enough and stuff seems to sink in for the kids about how different Atticus is compared to most other people in town, and how well liked he is, and especially in this case, how respected he is. And the reason that the black community respected him, again, I know I've talked about this before, was not because Atticus was Tom's lawyer. He could have had any lawyer, as it mentions here in the next chapter, but that in defending a black man, Atticus actually attempted to mount a real defense. And any non-impassioned observer knows that Tom Robinson was not guilty, and Atticus said that during his summation. And just the tremendous amount of respect that these people had for Atticus. He had done something that probably no other attorney, lawyer had done for anyone in the black community before. He had defended them against the word of white people. And because Atticus' strong sense of justice and right and wrong is why he did it, and they just wanted to acknowledge that. So, going from there, that's catch up from yesterday. Go to chapter 22. And once again, this is a repeat of what I just finished here. Miss Jean Louise, stand up, your father's passing. Atticus woke up the next morning, and he Calpurnia had fried chicken apparently ready for him for breakfast. Yeah, and he said, well, what's going on here? But and I need to back up here a little bit, just a second when I'm finished with here. Uh, and then she had some rolls out there, which is not usual for their breakfast anyway. Calpurnia said, Tom Robinson's daddy sent you along this chicken this morning. I fixed it. Atticus tells him, and they got the rolls from Estelle down at the hotel. Atticus said, you tell him I'm proud to get it. Bet they don't have chicken for breakfast at the White House. What are these? Rolls, said Calpurnia. Estelle down at the hotel sent them. We followed them. The kitchen table was loaded with enough food to bury the family. Hunks of salt pork, tomatoes, beans, even scuppernongs. Atticus grinned when he found a jar of pickled pig's knuckles. Reckon Annie will let me eat these in the dining room? Calpurnia said, this was all around the back steps when I got here this morning. They appreciate what you did, Mr. Finch. They aren't overstepping themselves, are they? Atticus's eyes filled with tears. My kids in my class, they commented after we read this. They said they can't wait to watch the movie. They want to see Atticus cry. And I informed them, I said, unfortunately, this little scene is not in the movie. Atticus's eyes filled with tears. He did not speak for a moment. Tell them I'm very grateful, he said. Tell them they must never do this again. Times are too hard. Once again, Atticus, as he has such a knack for doing, he is able to put himself on the plane with anybody he's talking to. And, that last statement he makes, tell them times are too hard. And what he's doing, first of all, he's very gracious, and, tell them thank you. Tell them I'm very grateful. He's very gracious in his beginning, but he tells them not to do it again because times are too hard. He is putting the black community on an equal plane with him. Times are too hard, and the subtext for that is times are too hard for everybody. You can't do this anymore. You don't have enough yourself. I'm like you. You're like me. Times are hard for all of us. So anyway, that has to do with, again, they're just showing their utmost respect for Atticus. And I forgot what else I was going to say. I was looking at it at the previous page, but I think it's unimportant at this point. All right, then they go outside. Miss Maudie's there, Miss Stephanie's there, Mr. Avery's there, and they're all around talking. And of course, they're giving Scout and Jim and Dill the what for, asking about. They ask a lot of questions. What kind of close up there? Close, of course, means stuffy, hot stuff. What kind of close up there with them? And didn't say it, but with the black people, and just peppered them with questions that was really none of their business. They were just prying. They were just being nosy. But Miss Maudie takes them aside, and she says, she's talking mainly to Jim. She's addressing Jim. She says, come on in here. And as you remember from previous reading, Miss Maudie always made a nice cake for herself, and when she did, she made 3 small cakes, one for Jim, one for Scout, and one for Dill. Well, they got in there this day, and there was 1 large cake as usual, and only 2 small cakes. So Scout immediately thought, and that's what my kids thought too, in class before we read it any farther, that Ms. Maudie had just overlooked Dill. Well, that wasn't it at all. Scout went on to say, I understood, when Maudie cut a piece of the big cake and she put it in front of Jim. And then Dill and Scout had their own, piece from the small cakes and everything. Jim is coming of age. He's really, he's reached puberty. He's starting to understand things more on an adult level. Scout is not. Of course, Dill is not either. And Ms. Maudie is just simply acknowledging that. She knows that Jim in particular was upset, about the verdict. I asked my kids this question that has nothing to do with anything on the board. I asked my kids this question today. I said, why was it so easy for Jim to get upset and cry at the verdict and what was happening, and yet for most of the rest of the adults in Macomb, it didn't seem to affect them, like it was just business as usual. And they put it around with some with some answers. None of them ever figured it out until I told them. And I said, forgot what I was going to say here now. Oh, I'm sorry. It's because, well, actually one boy did say something that was close. Kids see things as they are. They, if you say blue, they think blue. If you say green, they think green. Whereas adults have a lot of preconceived ideas, especially in this society here. They have a lot of preset notions that they're not going to change, as we talked about, yesterday, about our biases and about our prejudices, and confirmation bias we talked about yesterday. And really, the only thing the jurors were looking for, they were not looking at cold hard evidence. Anybody who looked at cold hard evidence had to come to the conclusion that Tom Robinson didn't commit the crime he was accused of, and Bob Buell had beat up his daughter. That was the cold hard evidence. But what the jury and what most of the rest of the people in town were looking at was a reason to go ahead and convict Tom. And we talked about this yesterday as well. And so Miss Maudie here, she is acknowledging Jim as growing up here. And he's still part child, part man, but she's just assuring him, as Scout says, that everything's fine. Everything's still the same, with her and with the kids. Nothing's changed. One of the people had asked the kids, are you mad because your daddy got beat in court? And that really wasn't an issue. Atticus had told them all along, we're going to lose here, but we have a good chance on appeal. And the kids didn't get mad at it or anything. I'm sure they didn't like it, but they didn't get mad at it. So she made the big cake for Jim. Next thing, and I really like this section of the book, and it's in the movie as well, although it's in different circumstances, a different setting. This part of the book where Maudie tells the kids about Atticus and really how special and how unique he is, and how he's different than most other people, and that they won't realize, again, we talked about this yesterday, the kids won't realize it till they're older. So anyway, Miss Maudie here, don't fret, Jim, things are never as bad as they seem. Indoors, when Miss Maudie wanted to say something lengthy, she spread her fingers on her knees and settled her bridge work. This she did, and we waited. I simply want to tell you that there are some men in this world who were born to do our unpleasant jobs for us. Your father's one of them. So right off, she's acknowledging Atticus has a special place. He's unique. Oh, said Jim, well, don't you owe well me, sir, Miss Maudie replied, recognizing Jim's fatalistic noises. You are not old enough to appreciate, to put a good value on what I said. Jim was staring at his half-eaten cake. It's like being in a caterpillar in a cocoon. That's what it is, he said. Like something asleep wrapped up in a warm place. I always thought Macon folks were the best folks in the world. At least that's what they seemed like. Well, we're the safest folks in the world, said Miss Maudie. We're so rarely called on to be Christians, but when we are, we got men like Atticus to go for us. Jim grinned ruefully. Wished the rest of the county thought that. You'd be surprised at how many of us do, said Maudie. Who? Jim's voice rose. Who in this town did one thing to help Tom Robinson? Just who? Well, his colored folks for one thing, and people like us. People like Judge Taylor. People like Mr. Heck Tate. Stop eating and start thinking, Jim. Did it ever strike you that Judge Taylor naming Atticus to defend that boy was no accident? That Judge Taylor might have had his reasons for naming him? Now, this was a thought. This is Scout talking here. Court-appointed defenses were usually given to Maxwell Green, Macon's latest addition to the bar. Who needed the experience? Maxwell Green should have had Tom Robinson's case. You think about that, Miss Maudie was saying. It was no accident. I was sitting there on the porch last night waiting. I waited and waited to see you all come down the sidewalk. And as I waited, I thought, Atticus Finch won't win. He can't win. But he's the only man in these parts who can keep a jury out so long in a case like that. And I thought to myself, well, we're making a step, but I put in point number 5. We're making a step. It's just a baby step. It's a step. And of course, she's talking about society, their society as a whole. And eliminating, erasing the social setup, as I've talked about many times, where the blacks are subhumans and they have no rights and no privileges. It's right. It's all right to talk like that. This is Jim talking here. Can't any Christian judges and lawyers make up for the heathen juries, Jim muttered, as soon as I get grown. Well, that's something you'll have to take up with your father, Miss Maudie said. All right. But anyway, you know, she's talking here. She's pointing out Atticus and what kind of a man he is and how he is so different from most of the rest of Macomb, and how he's kind of, in a way, he's leading the charge to bring about a needed change in Southern society. And then she talks about, you know, it's just a baby step we've taken here. Got a long, 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 long way to go. And of course, I mean, this was 1935. We understand how long it took to really get going throughout the South, and how many steps there still are to take in our world. The last part of this chapter, this is written differently than it appears in the movie, but it still has the same effect, where Atticus is standing on the corner at the post office, by the mailbox, I guess, and Bob Ewell comes up and spits in his face. And just as opposed to the blacks who stood as Atticus was leaving the courtroom and who brought, you know, loads of food for them to eat as a sign of their respect, Bob Ewell has nothing at all but contempt for Atticus because of what Atticus has done. Bob Ewell, even though he's ignorant and a lot of bad adjectives you could think about him, even though he's like that, he certainly has to realize that Atticus made a fool out of him in court. And people had bad enough opinions, views about the Finch family to begin with, and now it's even worse. He certainly has to be smart enough to realize that most people knew he was lying and knew Mayella was lying, and he's just boiling mad, at Atticus. We made it ahead to like the first page of the next chapter, and this spitting episode continues, and Bob Ewell says, first thing Atticus says was, "I wish Bob Ewell wouldn't chew tobacco." All right, and if you remember from the movie, I mean, it was just terrible that when Bob Ewell spit in Atticus's face. Again, it was a different setting. He was out at the Robinson house then. So anyway, that's what we had going here today. Like I said, my students, my class, they are really, you know, starting to get into this. They've all got strong opinions and everything. And, you know, it just didn't right. Just like Jim, it ain't right. It just wasn't right. But they have a lot of questions as well, which I enjoy answering as well. So anyway, that's it for today. I'll get to you tomorrow, and hope you have a good evening and a good day tomorrow. See you, Kim.